These are gram-positive bacteria that are found in the Bad Bug Book. So gram-positive bacteria have a thicker cell wall and are easier to kill with antibiotics. Today I'll be talking about Clostridium perfringens, Staphylococcus aureus, Bacillus cereus streptococcus, Listeria monocytogenes, Mycobacterium bovis, Clostridium botulinum, and Enterococcus. Clostridium perfringens. Clostridium perfringens is the second leading cause of foodborne illness in the US. It can produce a toxin in your intestines and produces two kinds of illnesses. The first one is common gastroenteritis, and the second one is pig bell enteritis. Enterotoxins. So the common gastroenteritis is, again, it's very common, produces mild cramps, watery diarrhea, starts within 8 hours to 16 hours. It's self-limiting within 24 hours, and illness can be long in vulnerable populations. So the pig bell disease is often fatal, rare in North America, and produces abdominal pain and gassy bloating, and then diarrhea and vomiting. The bacteria can form spores when conditions are tough. It protects the bacteria. It can survive cooking, and spores can become bacteria again when the food chills. This bacteria can multiply much faster than most. Foods left at room temperature can lead to Clostridium perfringens multiplying to dangerous levels. Clostridium perfringens, the bacteria, it's an anaerobic gram-positive bacteria. It is spore-forming and produces an enterotoxin. The bacteria is cold tolerant. The spores are heat tolerant. Non-pathogenic Clostridium perfringens is ubiquitous in the environment and can be found in our gut flora and in animals. Spores can exist in soils, sediments, and areas subject to fecal pollution. Clostridium perfringens type A produces the enterotoxin. So again, the disease is gastroenteritis and pig bell disease. Gastroenteritis is self-limiting, but can lead to intestinal damage, but is rare. Only a few deaths occur from Clostridium perfringens gastroenteritis. Clostridium perfringens pig bell disease is rare in North America and is severe and often fatal. Both forms are a result of consuming a large number of Clostridium perfringens cells, and these replicate more quickly than other bacterias. The likelihood of Clostridium perfringens will reach pathogenic levels is high if contaminated food is left unrefrigerated. So the onset of symptoms usually takes 16 hours. Symptoms of gastroenteritis are watery diarrhea and mild abdominal cramps. Symptoms of pig bell disease are abdominal distension, bloody diarrhea, and patchy necrosis in the small intestines. Complications include the necrosis of intestines and death. We can contract this orally. Pig bell disease involves a beta toxin. Consumption of sweet potatoes can contribute to the progression of disease. In World War II Germany, people were starved and only ate potatoes. This was most likely a factor to the high pig bell disease in Germany at the time. So it's the second most common foodborne illness, next to Salmonella, which is number one. It usually comes from food that is temperature abused. So food sources, it's mostly from temperature abused cooked food, from the spores germinating in the extended time in the temperature danger zone. A small number of cells are usually left after cooking, And once it germinates, the cells can reproduce really quickly. So it's important to keep food outside of the temperature danger zone. It's common in meat containing products and can be found in vegetables. Spores can survive boiling water for an hour in a protected medium such as meat. Diagnosis is done through the detection of the toxin in the feces, and then target populations include institutional settings like cafeteria and hospitals. In these places, large quantities of food are made hours before serving, which can prove risky for elderly and young. And these are the most frequent victims. And immunocompromised people are at highest risk. Staphylococcus aureus, aka staph, is common in the environment, so can be found in soil, water, air, and everyday products. Can also live in humans and animals. It produces an enterotoxin, but the bacteria is killed during cooking, but it's important to note that the toxin isn't destroyed from high temperatures. It can lead to body fluid loss and dehydration. Toxins are fast acting and onset can be hours. So Staphylococcus aureus, the bacteria, is a gram-positive, non-motile bacteria. It's spherical and looks like a bunch of grapes under a microscope. It's ubiquitous and almost impossible to eradicate. It has 32 subspecies and can be found on foods due to environmental, human, and animal contamination. It can produce a heat-stable toxin that can cause human gastroenteritis. Staphylococcus aureus is a versatile human pathogen capable of food poisoning. It can also cause toxic shock syndrome, pneumonia, and nosocomial infections or hospital infections. It is the most resistant type of non-spore forming pathogen to humans. It can survive in a dry state for extended periods of time. It can grow in a wide pH range between 4.5 and 9.3, and it can survive in low water availability. It's also highly tolerant to salts and sugars. Staphylococcal enterotoxins, or SE. It's basically a single chain of proteins that are resistant to enzymes. Illness by Staphylococcus aureus is caused by the enterotoxins. Mortality is uncommon, and the onset of symptoms is very rapid. It's 1 to 7 hours. And the main symptoms are, again, rapid onset of symptoms. That's the most notable thing. Nausea, diarrhea, abdominal cramping, and vomiting. Complications include dehydration and changes in blood pressure. Duration. It lasts for hours to 1 day. And the route of entry is food contaminated with Staphylococcus aureus toxin. So sources, again, it's ubiquitous, but more frequently implicated foods include meat and poultry, eggs, cream-filled pastries, sandwich fillings, and food that requires a lot of handling and kept above proper refrigeration temperatures. Again, heat kills the bacteria, but not the toxin. The bacteria is present in our nasal passages and throat, hair and skin, and most healthy individuals. It's more common on people in hospitals. Food handlers, plus arm or hand lesions, and coughing or sneezing can lead to the introduction of Staphylococcus aureus in foods. It can be spread when you have a different respiratory illness that causes you to cough or sneeze. Avoiding the temperature danger zone is essential in preventing the proliferation of Staphylococcus aureus and the production of the enterotoxin. Diagnosis is done by isolating the toxin in food or feces. Target populations. Everybody is susceptible to the toxin, and intensity varies between populations. Bacillus cereus. It's usually an underreported illness but it can cause serious illness. So it's usually underreported because the illness is mild, but it can lead to serious illness as well. It produces 2 types of illnesses. The first type is when bacteria is consumed, and then the bacteria in our intestines produces the toxin. This leads to diarrhea and it can be implicated in many types of food, and onset is 6 to 15 hours. The other type of illness is when the bacteria produces a different toxin on the food, and the food is consumed and the toxin causes the illness. This is common in starchy foods such as rice or pasta, and it has a very rapid onset of symptoms, so 30 minutes to 6 hours. Most important prevention is keeping proper cold temperatures. At higher temperatures, Bacillus cereus can form spores, and the more bacteria, so the longer time in the danger zone, when there's more bacteria and the longer time in the danger zone, it'll produce more toxin and there's a higher chance of illness. Cooking kills the bacteria, but again, doesn't kill the toxin. Bacillus cereus can grow at refrigerated temperatures. Bacillus cereus, the bacteria, it's a gram-positive facultative anaerobe, so it can survive with or without oxygen, and it can form spores. Production of enterotoxin is associated with vomiting, and it is widespread in the environment and is often found in soil and vegetation. Bacillus cereus can cause two forms of illnesses from two different toxins. The first type of illness we mentioned is called diarrheal Bacillus cereus, and it's produced inside the large intestine, and it's a larger protein toxin. The second disease is called vomiting Bacillus cereus, or emetic type Bacillus cereus, and it's produced on food, and so the toxin is a low weight toxin produced on food, and the toxin's heat stable, so we can't destroy it once it's on the food. Mortality is rare, but however, in healthy people, it can lead to liver failure. Onset of symptoms of diarrheal is quick, so 6 to 15 hours. But the most notable thing about Bacillus cereus is that the emetic type, the vomiting type, so the one found on rice and starchy food, has a very rapid onset of illness, so it's 30 minutes to 6 hours. Symptoms of diarrheal Bacillus cereus infection include watery diarrhea, cramps, and a similar illness to Clostridium perfringens. Symptoms of emetic or vomiting type Bacillus cereus produce vomiting and nausea, and it's similar to a Staph aureus infection. Duration is usually self-limiting within 24 hours. And route of entry is the bacteria produces toxin inside us or produces toxin on food, and we consume that food. So sources, diarrheal infection can come from a variety of foods where emetic, so where the toxins produced on the food, is common on rice and starchy food. Streptococcus species. So the same bacteria that causes strep throat can contaminate food. It's not a leading cause of foodborne illness, but infection can lead to serious problems. It can spread to other organs and cause serious illness or death. Streptococcus, it can be found on skin, mucous membranes, mouth, human urinary organs, animals, and dirty water. Food handlers can have it on their skin and throats. It's an opportunistic bacteria. It's a gram-positive non-motile bacteria. So mortality, so healthy people, it's low. Invasive strep, if it leads to invasive strep throat or streptococcus, death can occur. Onset's 1 to 3 days, and the most notable symptom is scarlet fever, which can develop 2 to 3 weeks. So symptoms include sore, inflamed throats, difficulty swallowing, high fever, headache, nausea, and vomiting. Another notable symptom is scarlet fever, which is a rash on the chest and abdomen, most common on children, and also rheumatic fever, which is inflammation of joints. Duration is 4 days, and it's noted that antibiotics can be used. Sources of this pathogen are from food handlers, and a major source of food contamination is from food handlers. Target population is children because they can develop scarlet fever. Listeria monocytogenes. So not many people are infected by Listeria, but it is a leading cause of death in foodborne illness, and it can cause disease in two forms: a gastroenteritis form and an invasive form. Gastroenteritis produces mild, intense nausea, vomiting, aches, fevers, and sometimes diarrhea, and is self-limiting. Invasive form leads to blood-borne infection and nervous system. It is deadly and can result in meningitis, so brain inflammation. Pregnant women are most susceptible to Listeria infection. The infection often leads to miscarriage. Listeria is usually associated with raw or underpasteurized milk and deli meats. Not drinking unpasteurized milk is a way of avoiding Listeria. Listeria monocytogenes, the bacteria. It's a gram-positive, motile bacteria and is the leading cause of death in foodborne illness. Most serotypes are associated with foodborne illness. It's a hardy bacteria that can survive salty environments and cold environments, so temperatures below 1 Celsius. Notable for its presence in food manufacturing environments. It's also ubiquitous and can be found in most environments and soil and decaying vegetation. Listeriosis. It produces a high mortality rate, especially it's a leading cause of foodborne illness, and it's a leading cause of death in foodborne illness. Onset of gastroenteritis can take hours to days, whereas invasive form can be days to months. Symptoms. Healthy people might have mild or no symptoms, but symptoms include fever, muscle aches, nausea, vomiting, and sometimes diarrhea. Severe infection can lead to headaches, stiff necks, confusion, loss of balance, and convulsions. Complications. Gastroenteritis is usually self-limiting, but invasive form usually leads to septicemia and meningitis. Manifestation depends on the host. Vulnerable populations tend to get severe infections, which lead to sepsis and spreads to the nervous system, causing meningitis. Pregnant women are the most vulnerable population. Pregnant women will experience flu-like symptoms, and their pregnancy can lead to miscarriage or stillbirths. 1 in 3 infections lead to abortions. Sources. It's usually associated with raw and underpasteurized products, so milks, ice creams, chocolate milks, and cheeses, specifically soft cheeses. It can also be found in fermented meats, so raw sausages, hot dogs, deli meats, smoked fish. It's prevalent in manufacturing, and sources of contamination include workers, incoming air, raw materials, and the processing environment itself. Food contact surfaces are the greatest threat to the production of contamination. Target populations. Again, pregnant women, it can lead to neonatal infections and miscarriages. Immunocompromised, cancer patients, specifically leukemia patients, diabetics, and the elderly. Healthy people are also at risk if the food is heavily contaminated. Diagnosis is done through tissue samples, blood samples, or cerebrospinal fluid samples. It's important to note that stool is not really informative for Listeria monocytogenes. Mycobacterium bovis. Tuberculosis is often spread through coughing. One type of TB bacteria can be spread through unpasteurized cow's milk. Foodborne TB, or Mycobacterium bovis, produces no symptoms for some people and can take months to years for symptoms to appear. It can affect different types of the body. Mycobacterium bovis, the bacteria, it's a gram-positive aerobic non-motile bacteria that does not have an outer cell membrane. It does not produce spores. Mycobacteria are very hardy because of their unique cell wall. It allows them to survive chemical disinfectants, and they can resist antibiotics. They can survive an environment for several months, specifically in cold, dark conditions. They aren't fastidious, so they're not too picky about their growing conditions, and they grow very slowly. They're ubiquitous in nature and can be found in water, soil, specifically cows and their GI tracts. They're pathogenic for cattle and can be to humans. So the disease. It causes tuberculosis in cattle and is a zoonotic disease that can affect humans too. It's rare in North America because of milk pasteurization and cattle culling. Mortality rate is low because of the low amount of cases, but it can cause death. Onset is months to years. Symptoms include fever, night sweats, loss of appetite, and weight loss. Complications include death if it's untreated. Its most common source is cow's milk that is underpasteurized. It can also be found in undercooked meats like venison, and it can be contracted via aerosols. Target populations include those who consume underpasteurized milk, the young, elderly, and immunocompromised. Clostridium botulinum. It's an uncommon illness, but if you get it, it tends to be deadly if untreated. A toxin produced by Clostridium botulinum causes the illness. It can grow in low oxygen environments, specifically canned foods. Canned food is usually contaminated before being sealed. No visible signs of contamination with canned food, but some signs can include the swollen cans or damaged cans. Illnesses usually happen from improperly home canned foods that are not properly processed or cooked. The toxin can produce paralysis and even it can lead to breathing paralysis and death. Infant botulism happens when the bacteria resides in the gut and produces toxin. Signs include constipation, dull face, weak sucking from feeding, weak crying, loss of movement, trouble swallowing, and excessive drooling. For this reason, children under 1 should never be fed honey. Honey is linked with infant botulism, and it is important to give early treatment for infant botulism or regular botulism. Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria, it's an anaerobic gram-positive spore-forming bacteria that produces a neurotoxin. Most strains produce one type of toxin. Organisms and its spores are widely distributed in nature, can be found in soils and sediments at the bottom of lakes and rivers and streams and coastal waters. It can also be found in the intestinal tracts of fish and mammals, the gills of crabs and shellfish. It's important to note that Clostridium perfringens does not produce botulism. Botulism is a very serious and fatal disease caused by a potent neurotoxin produced during the growth of Clostridium botulinum. Infection results in flaccid paralysis of muscles, including those used for breathing. There are 3 types of botulism: foodborne botulism, associated with canned food, infant botulism, associated with honey and children consuming them, and wound botulism. The neurotoxin blocks motor nerve terminals, causing the face to droop and can cause death from asphyxia. Foodborne botulism. It's a severe food poisoning caused by the toxin from Clostridium botulinum. It's usually associated with inadequately processed home-cooked and preserved foods. Incidences are low, but mortality is very high. Infant botulism. So basically the spores colonize and produce toxins in the infant's GI tract. Wound botulism. It's the rarest form and doesn't involve food. It happens when the bacteria colonizes a wound and produces the toxin. It can reach other parts of the body through the bloodstream and can cause gas gangrene in the skin. So treatment. Early administration of botulinum antitoxin is important. And it's important to note that antibiotics are not recommended to be used because the death of Clostridium botulinum releases the toxin. So the mortality is really high. Infective dose is a small amount of toxin. And even the onset of the symptoms is hours in adults. Complications include death. Symptoms in adults include double vision, drooped eyelids, slurred speech, difficulty swallowing, dry mouth, muscle weakness. It can progress to paralysis of the arms, legs, and the respiratory system. For infants, flat facial expressions, poor feeding, weak crying, decreased movement, and difficulty breathing. Food sources. When food processing allows for spore survival and food is not heated before consumption to eliminate live cells, this is the most common source of Clostridium botulinum. Food above a pH of 4.6 can support growth and toxin production. Salt concentration is needed to inhibit spores. So common foods include canned products that are specifically corn, pepper, sprouts, beets, mushrooms, and olives, tuna fish, and chicken. It also includes luncheon meats and salted fish. For infant botulism, honey is the main reservoir, and children under 12 months shouldn't be fed honey. Enterococcus. Anyone can get infected, but most people likely to suffer are those with pre-existing illnesses. It can be transmitted in many different ways, but is often through food. Meat and milk that aren't processed properly can transmit Enterococcus. Enterococcus is antibiotic resistant, and older antibiotics can't really kill it. Enterococcus, the bacteria, is a gram-positive facultative anaerobe, which means can grow with or without oxygen. It's an opportunistic bacteria that can survive harsh conditions. It can grow at temperatures up to 45 Celsius, salty environments, and it can survive pH environments up to 9.6. The disease is largely a nosocomial infection, so from hospitals, and it usually affects people who already have underlying conditions. It's important to note that there's a global spread of vancomycin and multi-drug resistant enterococci, and they're a major threat to human health. The mortality rate of Enterococcus is very high. The onset of symptoms is 2 to 36 hours after ingesting food. Symptoms include diarrhea, abdominal cramps, nausea, vomiting, fever, chills, and dizziness. Sources of Enterococcus include, Enterococcus is ubiquitous and it can grow in harsh environments, and it can be found on animals, birds, insects, plants, soil, and water. It can also be found in the human GI tract. Most common foods are evaporated milk, meat croquettes, meat pies, raw milks, and then any food that undergoes unsanitary food processing are at risk of enterococci. And that concludes gram-positive bacteria in the bad book from the CDC.